What if the most powerful speech in Chinese history was never spoken by the man they say did it? In 2013, Xi Jinping delivered a private address to top party officials, a speech that shaped China's strategy for a decade. It was recorded. It was archived. It was analyzed for years. But what if that voice wasn't his? What if the entire policy shift was triggered by a voiceprint, fabricated, planted, and never meant to be uncovered? This isn't just a story about a speech. It's about identity, control, and the terrifying power of a voice that sounds exactly like yours, but isn't. Welcome to The Voice That Wasn't His, the recording room no one could access. They called it Room 407. Buried deep within the Ministry of State Security's older complex, before the renovations, before the biometric locks, Room 407 had no official designation. It wasn't listed on schematics. It had no operational title. But everyone knew what it was used for. Recording. Not surveillance. Not monitoring. Recording. Room 407 was where speeches were immortalized before they became policy. Leaders didn't just deliver them once. They rehearsed them, perfected them, captured them. Xi Jinping first entered Room 407 in early 2013. It was his first year as president. A private gathering had been scheduled with members of the Politburo Standing Committee. No journalists, no transcripts, just a single sealed audio recording to be stored in the Central Archive. It was referred to internally as Directive 9. That's all most people ever knew. A number, a moment. But then, 10 years later, something shifted. A low-level linguistics consultant at the Shanghai AI Institute, working on tonal pattern modeling for synthetic speech recognition, was testing old voice samples from political archives to train their neural net. One file stood out. It was labeled XJP_407_9 mastered wave. She played it once, then again, and again. The speech was measured, commanding, deliberate. But something felt off. She couldn't place it at first. The tone was Xi's. The pacing matched. Even the pauses, those carefully calculated silences that define Xi's style, were perfect. Too perfect. Xi ran a harmonic analysis. Xi's known voice samples had micro-variations in certain consonant transitions, slight pitch deviations on aspirated Mandarin tones. The sample didn't. It was mathematically flawless. So she cross-referenced it with verified vocal fingerprints from other known Xi speeches. The match came back. 98.7% similar. But not 100%. Under normal circumstances, a 1.3% deviation could be dismissed. Background noise, equipment variation, vocal fatigue. But not here. Because the metadata on the file said it was captured on analog tape. And analog doesn't produce that kind of perfection. Then she found the anomaly. At timestamp 7:41 in the recording, there was a microglitch. A half-millisecond digital wobble, like a compression artifact. But analog files don't have compression artifacts. Which meant one thing. This file wasn't a transfer. It wasn't a restored archive. It was a fabrication. But why would anyone fake a speech that had already happened? Unless it had never actually happened. Unless what the party had accepted as Directive 9 wasn't a real moment, but a synthetic initiation. A command structure built on an illusion. She reported it to her supervisor. That was a mistake. By morning, her workstation was locked. Her security badge deactivated. And the file deleted. But not before she saved a copy. One she uploaded to an encrypted folder tied to her own neural model. One that mimicked voices, including Xi's. Which led to the next problem. When she tried to train the AI on Xi's verified speeches, it rejected half of them. The machine flagged over 20 different recordings from the past decade as unauthentic tonal deviation, including televised ones, official ones, which meant either the algorithm was broken, or the deception was much deeper than one speech. Someone, somewhere, had been replacing Xi's voice in critical moments. Not just once. Consistently. And the origin of all those files, every single one could be traced to a single access node. An offline archival drive linked to only one location. Room 407. But Room 407 no longer existed. The building had been demolished in 2018. Or so they said. Because 2 weeks after her discovery, the consultant received a package. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape. On the label, handwritten in red ink, XJP, Room 407, True Tape. And beneath it, scratched faintly into the plastic. The voice isn't the only thing that isn't his. The voice that rewrote a nation. The tape hissed before it spoke. It wasn't just background noise. It sounded alive. Like the machine was breathing. She sat alone in her apartment, cassette deck whirring. Her hands trembled as she hit play. Not from fear, but from the sense that, whatever was about to emerge from those tiny speakers, it wasn't just a voice. It was a weapon. Then came the words. In an age of appearances, truth is no longer declared, it is performed. It was Xi's voice. But raw. Less polished. Less restrained. Like something he might have said in a private rehearsal, without cameras, without handlers. Policy is perception. Control the sound. And you don't need the silence. Xi froze. This version of Directive 9 wasn't the speech taught in political academies. It wasn't the sanitized text shared in inner party circles. It was darker, sharper, and nowhere in any database. The implications were terrifying. This was the real recording, never broadcast, never released, never intended to survive. And the version the world had accepted. A fabrication. That meant the policy foundation of a decade had been shaped not by Xi's authentic ideology, but by a synthetic echo. She played it again. The voice on the tape was passionate, urgent, at times, brutal. Our enemies do not fear our weapons. They fear that we might stop pretending. What did that even mean? She began cross-referencing timestamps from this tape with the official transcript. They didn't match. In fact, entire passages from the official version didn't exist on the tape. Worse, phrases from the real tape contradicted them. On page 3 of the official directive, she was quoted as saying, "Harmony must always precede strategy." But on the tape, harmony is the enemy of strategy. Too much of it, and even lions starve. Was this a discarded draft? A rehearsed monologue that evolved into something tamer? Or had the official version been manufactured from the beginning? She uploaded the audio to a hidden forum of voiceprint analysts and former intelligence linguists. Within hours, one of them responded, "This speech isn't just different, it's the original." Then another message appeared. "We saw this pattern before. In Project Whisper. Only back then, it wasn't Xi's voice they were faking." She pressed for more. But the thread vanished. And 2 usernames went dark. Her inbox pinged with a secure link. A single message. "It's bigger than one voice. You need to hear the reversal broadcast." She clicked the link. What she heard was madness. A broadcast from 2015, officially aired on state television, supposedly featuring Xi addressing rural development strategy. But the voice didn't match his biometric patterns. Not even close. Same tone, same phrasing, different vocal DNA. The conclusion hit like ice in her lungs. Over the years, the use of deep voice synthesis hadn't been sporadic. It had been systemic. Moments of political volatility. Speeches surrounding corruption crackdowns. Sudden strategic shifts. All of them featured voice anomalies. Which meant Xi Jinping may not have delivered all the speech's history attributes to him. Or worse, he did, but someone replaced them anyway. Which raises the darkest question yet. Was it to protect him? Or to control him? The thought wouldn't leave her. That Xi's image, his authority, had become so essential to the system, it no longer needed the man himself. Just his voice. Or what sounded like it. Suddenly, it wasn't about authenticity. It was about plausibility. And in the world of total narrative control, plausibility was more than enough. The room where his voice was locked. The address was simple. Just 4 Chinese characters. An outdated administrative code. Old State Sound Archive. She'd never heard of it before. It wasn't listed in any registry, any database, any map. But it matched something in the encryption metadata of the tape she'd received. A folder buried under layers of misdirection had pointed to it, twice. A building that, officially, didn't exist. The next day, she boarded a train to the outskirts of Beijing. No luggage, no phone, just the tape, and the questions it refused to answer. The location led her to an industrial park that hadn't been updated since the late 80s. Rusted signage, unlit alleys, corrugated walls covered in faded propaganda slogans. At the far end stood a gray concrete structure, 3 stories high, no windows on the top floor. A single steel door with a fingerprint scanner long out of service. Above it, someone had spray painted in white. They forgot to erase the voice. She tried the door. Locked. She circled back. An old ventilation shaft barely wide enough to crawl through. 15 claustrophobic minutes later, she was inside. What she found wasn't an archive. It was a mausoleum. Tape reels. Filing cabinets. Decayed microphones bolted into wooden desks. Walls covered in soundproof foam now crumbling from age and humidity. A faint buzz from overhead lights that shouldn't have worked. Everything was frozen in time. Then, in the center of the room, an isolated booth. Glass reinforced with wire mesh. Inside it, a single reel-to-reel tape machine. Plugged in. Waiting. She stepped in. The air smelled like dust and copper. The tape was already loaded. On the label, XJP, Voice Seed, Iteration 0. She hit play. No intro. No context. Just a voice, Xi's voice, repeating a single sentence over and over. The party is not a mirror. It is a mask. And a mask becomes the face. Over and over. Same intonation. Same pauses. Until, on the 12th repetition, something changed. A mask becomes the face. A mask becomes the face. Becomes the voice. She rewound. Played again. The voice had altered itself. The pitch, the tonality, even the breathing pattern had shifted ever so slightly. The machine was learning. It wasn't just playing Xi's voice. It was growing it. Building a version that evolved each time the phrase was replayed. That's when she noticed the adjacent tapes. Labeled sequentially. XJP_1A, XJP_1B, XJP_2A. Hundreds of them. Every reel representing a different version of Xi. Different moods. Different policy tones. Some assertive. Others conciliatory. Some almost paranoid. She realized something horrifying. The party hadn't just synthesized a speech. They'd synthesized options. Versions of Xi tailored to different outcomes. One voice for economic policy. One for military posture. One for international diplomacy. Each pre-recorded. Each chosen not by Xi himself, but by someone or something else. At that moment, the fluorescent lights flickered. And she heard it. Not through the tape. Through the intercom above her. You were never meant to find this room. She froze. The air turned cold. Please remain calm. Security has been notified. She bolted out. Traced her way back through the shaft. Barely breathing, heart hammering. Outside, everything was quiet. No sirens. No guards. But something had changed. She checked her backpack. The original tape was gone. Replaced with a new one. No label. No sound. Just a sticky note attached. You've heard his voice. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you saw his mouth move? The mouth that didn't match the words. The footage was buried inside an old CCTV internal archive, password protected and disguised as rehearsal material. No title, no metadata. Just a 36-minute video file labeled XJPVR closecam to MP4. She didn't find it. It found her. After escaping the archive, she returned home to find her tablet already powered on. The video was queued. The same sticky note from the previous tape rested on her keyboard. Now watch his mouth. The screen flickered to life. The image quality was better than expected, Ultra HD, shot with a lens too sophisticated for standard party broadcast setups. Xi Jinping stood behind a lectern. The scene was familiar. April 2015. Rural Development Summit. Official speech. But this wasn't the feed the public had seen. This was recorded from the left side. A tight frame on his face. No audience. No teleprompters. He began to speak. The words were clear, controlled, rehearsed. But his mouth, it didn't sync. Not perfectly. Not even close. Milliseconds off at first. Then entire syllables. Then whole sentences. At 4:27, his lips stopped moving entirely, but the voice continued. She rewound. Played it again. Same result. She stood stone-faced for a full 10 seconds while his voice echoed through the chamber. This wasn't a glitch. It was a performance. Somebody had added the voice track later. Replaced the original. Overwritten reality with something safer. She ran a waveform analysis and discovered 2 audio layers. The vocal track wasn't even embedded in the original feed. It was overlaid, like a dubbed film. And that wasn't the worst part. At 21:03, his head turned slightly. For just a frame or two, the skin under his jaw glitched. A seam. Then, a flicker. Like a reflection behind a mask. Like something else was beneath. She paused the video. Zoomed in. Enhanced. The jawline distorted at an unnatural angle. Not an artifact. Not lighting. A different structure. A different face. She gasped. This wasn't just about a faked voice. It was about the possibility that the man speaking wasn't she at all. Either a synthetic deepfake, or worse, a body double. And if that were true, how long had he been replaced? She cross-checked other events. Other speeches. The same pattern repeated. Mouth slightly off. Voices too perfect. Timelines inconsistent. And then came the real blow. A memo. Leaked anonymously. Internal state security note. Begin phase-out of live public appearances. Transition to hybrid transmission models. Archive body model backups in VR Vault 3. The memo was dated 2017. 2 full years after the summit speech. Which meant that by then, the deception wasn't an emergency protocol. It was standard practice. She stared at the frozen frame on her screen. Xi's face. Unmoving. The voice, still ringing in her head. The party must never be questioned. But now, the only question that mattered was, who was really speaking? The silence that couldn't be erased. The rain had started falling by the time she reached the river. It wasn't even dramatic rain, just the kind that soaks into your skin without asking. She sat on the steps near the embankment, headphones in, replaying the voice one more time. Not Xi's. Not anymore. She had compared hundreds of samples. Public addresses. Leaked memos. Audio from private dinners. None of them aligned perfectly. Every voice attributed to him since 2015 carried traces of something artificial. She sent a final encrypted message to a journalist she trusted. They replaced more than his words. Then she disappeared. That would have been the end of it. Another dissident swallowed by the silence. But a month later, a strange upload surfaced on a closed server in the Balkans. A live feed. Grainy. Shadowed. It showed a figure walking through a gray hallway. No sound. Just flickering lights. The man's face was familiar. Unmistakable. Xi Jinping. But his mouth never moved. Not once. Instead, a speaker embedded in the ceiling played a message. You must believe in what you see, even when you can't trust what you hear. Then blackout. No origin. No trace. But it sparked a quiet war in the world of intelligence. Whispers emerged that she hadn't made a public decision in years. That a core council had assumed control. That he'd been reduced to a symbol, animated by technology, projected by need. The voice had become the regime. And then, in an unexpected twist, someone close to the top vanished. A translator, known only by her badge number. No obituary. No retirement. But a name appeared in a database cross-linked with the State Archive. Neural Architect, Audio Integrity Division. And her clearance level? Room 407. The cycle had started again. The voice lived on, even if the man behind it never did. And maybe, that's the real silence we should fear. Not the silence of a man who never speaks, but the silence that remains even after we realize it was never his voice to begin with. If this story made you question what's real and what's not, subscribe for more. Because what's hidden is often what matters most. Stay curious. Stay critical. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the next untold story.